Welcome to the subcommittee meeting for the audit subcommittee of the Springfield City Council. It is now 4 o'clock on February 24th. We have 4 items on the agenda. If I can just find the agenda, give me 1 second. The presentation of the Office of Internal Audit's fiscal year 2022 goals is the first item, followed by the presentation and update of the Office of Internal Audit's activities. There also is an investigative report on an ethics violation, followed by the last item, which is a discussion of an audit or a potential audit on municipal contracts. We are joined by our president, Councilor Marcus Williams, as well as myself. I think Marcus makes it now a quorum as the chair, and that is all the council that we have on the call. I'm sure more might be joining us. Mr. No, I'm going to turn it over to you. My hope is that we can do 10 minutes for each item, and then maybe a 5-minute question and answer period, which will leave us with a few moments at the end. So hopefully we can stay on track with that timeline. So Mr. No, the floor is yours. I'll let you get started.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Hurst. If I could propose, in the interest of time, starting off with the investigative report regarding the ethics violation at DPW. Mr. Signoli has a meeting, I think he has to attend to around 5. So in the interest of time, if we could start off with that report.
Sounds good, Mr. No.
Okay, so I'd like to share my screen. So I will see if I can get this report. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so we received Director William Mahoney a complaint against the DPW director in regards to giving a city property to a private citizen and using city property or city equipment in doing so. So the property relates to a damaged Nathan Bill's Park sign, and the private citizen is the owner of a Nathan Bill's restaurant. So the allegation was made that the sign given to this private citizen and city resources were used in doing so. We looked into this allegation, and we used 2 criteria in assessing whether the allegation had truth to it. And those criteria involve the ethics law, which I'll start with first here. It's MGL section 268, section 23. So what that law states is that a municipal employee may not use his official position to get something worth more than $50 for someone else that would not be properly available to other similarly situated individuals. And the city ordinance in regards to use of city-owned property is city ordinance section 38-6. No city official shall engage or permit the unauthorized use of city-owned property. So that relates to the ethics portion. And with respect to the policy in regards to disposing of obsolete goods, that's defined by city ordinance section 82-16. And that basically says that whenever a city department wants to get rid of obsolete and scrap materials, they must contact procurement, the Office of Procurement, to do so. So the Office of Procurement should be responsible for disposing of all waste and obsolete items. So what we found during this investigation is that, 1, we didn't find any evidence that Director Signoli had violated ethics regulations. And that's because one of the damaged sign that we're talking about here, it's this damaged Nathan Bill sign. I believe it was damaged, and it was used as a roadblock at one point over on Avocado Street, and subsequently moved to the DPW yard. It was just a slab of concrete taking up space. And Director Signoli determined it had no value, and he wanted to get rid of it. And he determined that it was cheaper to get rid of the sign by giving it away to a private citizen, as opposed to paying a vendor to dispose of it. Now, the use of city equipment would have been the same in both scenarios. He would have had to deliver the sign to a vendor to dispose of it, likewise to this private citizen. So the only difference is the cost to dispose of the equipment and the Director Signoli, in his role as director, had the authorization to use city resources to dispose of the sign by giving the sign away to a private citizen. And as I mentioned, it was done for the public's interest. It was cheaper to give the sign away to this private citizen as opposed to disposing of it. So I want to point out on page 4 here that our office looked into a similar allegation involving an employee over at the forestry department. An allegation was made that this employee was giving away city wood that was stored at the parks yard in the parks department to a certain individual, and that he was using city resources in doing so. So in that investigation, we found that ethics law had been violated because, one, that wood had value. We asked the city forester to determine how much value that wood had, and his role as a licensed forester, he had the authority and the know-how determining the value of the wood, and he determined it was worth a lot more than $50. And also, this employee had no authority to give away the wood by the parks director, nor did he have authority to use city equipment in giving away the wood. So in that situation, we did find evidence that that employee did violate ethics law. So that report will be once this matter is fully adjudicated. It has not yet been fully adjudicated, but once it has, our process will be to present it to the audit committee.
Thank you.
So I have Director Signoli here on the call in the event that any members have questions.
Thank you. And before we get to questions, I just want to acknowledge that Councilor Whitfield is indeed on or present at this meeting. Director Signoli, did you want to add anything?
No, the only thing that I did want to add to it is that the original request that this material actually started with the East Forest Park Civic Association. So it wasn't just directly with a private citizen. It started as a request from the neighborhood association. And as a department and as other departments in the city, we do things for neighborhood associations all the time at their requests. You know, we've dropped off compost at neighborhood gardens and things like that. So that's where this initially started with.
Thank you. We're also joined by Councilor Allen. It looks like he is on Susan's feed here.
Yeah.
So little confused.
I'll figure how to get out how to. Yeah, that's from something from yesterday. So,
good to have you here.
So I didn't hear the beginning of that. Could you just give me 2 seconds on what that issue was?
So Young No, I'm sorry, Mr. No. Quickly, can we give a quick recap for Counselor Allen?
Yes.
Maybe a minute or two.
Yeah, will do. So we investigated an allegation that we received against the director of DPW involving an ethics complaint. An allegation was made that Director Signoli had given away city property, which in this case was a damaged Nathan Bill sign, to a private citizen, and city equipment was used in doing so.
Thank you, Mr. No. Are there any questions from the counselors regarding this allegation or complaint? There are no questions from counselors. I actually have a few questions, namely for you, Mr. No. What did we do to inform employees and department heads that this is not the proper procedure?
So we requested that the Office of Procurement notify department heads of the city ordinance as it relates to disposing of obsolete goods and scrap materials, that they should contact procurement when doing so.
And so how do we know that that has indeed been sent out by procurement, and that it also has made its way down to all of the employees?
So we, I followed up with a call to the deputy director of procurement, and he indicated that an email was sent out. And I believe, Chris, you can attest to that.
Yeah, we've seen it. Yeah, that came out probably 2, 3, 4 months ago.
Okay, so it just seems to me that we ought to do some follow-up, Mr. No, just to make sure that all of the department heads understand the seriousness of this particular matter, and to make sure that their employees know what the proper protocol is. My second question, as long as I don't see any hands in the queue, because I have a few, if I see a hand, then I will stop. Was the sign the DPW directors, or was the sign the Parks Department? And do we have any concrete information that tells us it was one or the other?
So, Chris, I'll let you answer that, Chris.
Sure. If some of you remember, at all of the parks in the city, I don't know about all of them, they used to have these square pillars that had the name of the park on them. They were concrete, and there was one at Nathan Bill Park that somebody had run into with a car, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago. We have no idea how long ago. Basically broke the thing in half. And it was used as a roadblock down in the north end. It was buried so that vehicles couldn't access the rail trail area. When our guys discovered it probably 3 years ago now, we notified the park department because obviously it was theirs, and we asked them if they wanted it back. I talked to Pete Krupchak and Pat Sullivan at that time. Primarily Pete. We gave them some pictures of it. Since it was broken in half, they said, no, we don't need it. And the one at Nathan Bill had been replaced. So they basically said, it's yours. We put it in our yard, and it sat there for 1.5 years, and all we did was move it around, and we put it on a truck, and we were going to be disposing of it when this whole event came up. Somebody requested it.
Thank you, Mr. Signoli. I guess based off of everything that I've read, it seems like it's in question as to whose it is, and whether what'd you say, Mr. Kupchak?
Yeah,
I get that right? Whether he recalls that actual conversation. I didn't see anything here, unless I'm missing something, Mr. No, that said from Mr. Kupchak that he remembered that conversation. And so we don't have to belabor the point, but it also speaks to, I think, the issue of, whether this indeed was the Parks Department, but was the Parks Department or was DPW's? But for the sake of moving this show along, I'll move on into my next question if I don't see any other questions from counselors. And that is, Mr. No, is this good practice to allow the department heads who are ultimately going to be assessing the value of these materials? Is it good practice to allow just them to be the one to assess the value of the materials? Because at the end of the day, if they assign it no value, they can give it away. And it would seem to me that there should be some sort of checks and balances. If it's to the department head's advantage, for whatever reason, then they would assign it no value. And so I guess I know that's what procurement said that they would do. And to me, there seems to be something wrong with that procedure. Can you weigh in just a bit?
I think for those matters that where the answer seems obviously wrong, procurement will step in, and it's ultimately the call of the chief procurement officer to determine value. But she defers to department head because they're in the best position in terms of determining the value. But there's this common sense approach that they undertake at the procurement department, that if something doesn't make sense, then they'll do their own evaluation. And that's, they're just following guidelines that's set forth by city ordinance and Mass General laws when it comes to scrap items.
Got it. We're also joined by Councilor Brown, who is a member of this committee. Mr. No, was there any potential liability that you foresee in the DPW using the materials to drop this off at Nathan Bill's? I mean, if they were going to drop it off at a particular site that specializes in disposing of a two-ton concrete sign, it would seem to me that they would assume some liability in the event that something went wrong. This particular sign went to a private property, 2-ton sign. Do you see any potential liability that could have occurred here in the event something went wrong?
There could have been,
certainly more liability than if it went to where it was, where they normally dispose of it, right?
Right, but I think Chris could talk to about this better than I can in terms of protocols and dropping off materials.
Chris, are there any protocols in terms of, I mean, just thinking about it from a liability standpoint, it seems to me that the last thing we want to have happen is to have somebody get injured delivering a sign on private property, and certainly not have the backdrop of the actual company that normally knows how you would dispose of a particular sign. I mean, do you see a potential increase liability for the city here?
Not from a liability perspective, no. From an optics standpoint, probably. For the reason is that the disposal process that we use, whether it was dumping it at this location or bringing it to another, it's all on us to do it anyway. So it's not like we do it one way if we were going to drop it off at point A, and if we do it a different way, we do it somewhere else.
But certainly to the place in which
we do things for neighborhood groups all the time, and we if there's a liability of something that happens there, we have issues with that as well.
Okay. So I won't push any further, but it does seem to me like there could be a potential liability if the owner of this private property gets injured in the dropping off of this sign. Certainly a much more of a potential liability than if you dropped it off at a place that specializes in disposing of these materials. So I would definitely check into it for the future. And then, Young No, the last question that I have is, I know there was an employee in the forestry department who I've had a conversation with, who is now facing consequences for doing something very similar. Are there any ramifications for the actions of Mr. Signoli? Has this been brought before the mayor? Now, we don't want to get into, any labor issues per se in terms of discipline, but has this been brought to the mayor, and has he seen this?
We sent the report to city management.
Okay.
And we did note that this was more of a procedural violation as opposed to an ethics issue. So the forestry issue is an ethics issue, which we deem to be a bit more serious than a procedural violation. Now, Director Signoli acknowledges that he wasn't aware of the procedural requirements to dispose of the scrap materials, but now he is aware of it, and I'm sure he'll follow the proper protocols in the future in disposing of obsolete goods.
So I would close with two things. I'd say the individual at the forestry department feels the same way. Since I've had a conversation with him, I also think it's arguable as to whether this is an ethics violation based off of my, my reading and analysis of it. It seems to me that the only difference here is that Mr. Signoli was indeed the owner of this particular 2-ton sign per se. In the event that he was not, then he would have been in violation, which I think is arguable. Then he would be just as much in violation as the forester. With all that to say, I think we need to do better in the future. And then the last thing I'll say is we shouldn't be giving anything free to Nathan Bills in light of everything that has occurred. And so I know Director Signoli, probably looking at it in hindsight, recognizes and understands that this is a lapse in judgment, especially considering that we paid out over $1 million and currently have a lawsuit that is going on right now. And so to me, that makes it extremely problematic that out of all people, we're going to give it to an individual that may, we certainly don't know, but that establishment has been involved in costing taxpayers $1 million and is currently involved in a criminal lawsuit. So, with that being said, we'll let the mayor deal with it, and those are all the questions that I have, unless there are any questions from the council. And seeing none, we will move forward with your report. Mr. No, thank you, Mr. Signoli.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I will close out of this report. And share. Can everyone see my the screen here called Audit Goals for Fiscal Year 22?
Yes.
Okay. So we are required by city ordinance to present annual goals to city council. And consistent with last year, we established 8 goals for our department. In the interest of time, I will not go over every goal, but there are a couple that I want to point out. And I'll start off with goal number 2. So this goal pertains to completing 80% of our annual audit plan each year. Now, 80% is just a benchmark that we try to strive to, but that figure or that, I guess, the success of that benchmark, it all depends on whether we are faced with unanticipated projects or special requests, but it's a goal that we set for ourselves every year. Goal number 5 is to allocate 50% of our available time or available audit hours to audit and audit-related projects, 20% to maintaining the fraud hotline, and 30% to administrative training and other admin items. So we've been fairly successful in meeting this goal. We spend most of our audit hours or audit time on audit-related projects and fraud-related items. I do want to make note that our department is down a staff. We are usually staffed with 3 full-time equivalents. We are down to 2. It's just Cecilia and I, but I am in the process of hiring someone in the late spring, an audit staff. So we should be up to full speed when fiscal year 22 starts. Any questions on our goals?
Are there any questions from the counselors regarding the goals? Sorry, I haven't done this in a while. I don't see any hands raised.
I had a question.
Go ahead, Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
If you can go back to 2, please.
Yes.
So basically, number 2 is you pretty much are forecasting that number anyways.
Yeah, yes, we try to complete 80% of our audit plan each year.
And that's based on what historical data are you using? What kind of
based upon our prior experience and our budget hours. We have a set set number of hours in our department. I understand how that goes, but what I'm saying on number 2, you set that. You decide that. Correct? I decide that, yes.
Okay. So you decide it's easy to make 80%. Like for me, I understand how it works. So if I want to make 80% every single time, and I decide it when I'm forecasting it based on historical data, I can increase that and decrease that if I've been at it long enough. It's very simple to do. But I'm saying that 80% is something that you can kind of control, correct?
Well, no. The 80% is something that we set as a goal. But when we compare the actual results, we look at the number of audits.
I understand that portion, but I'm saying basically you said it, correct?
Yeah, I set the 80%. Okay. I set the goal. Now that 80% is pretty consistent with what other audit departments set for themselves. We think it's a reachable goal every year.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Brown. Councilor Williams, President Williams, sorry.
No worries. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is actually, we have a copy of this. I think this is actually a good template to use and looking not only at just the auditing department, but other departments, with that are kind of giving us the strategic vision for the upcoming year, fiscal year. And hopefully at the time of maybe budget or, if there's other opportunities to have that discussion, maybe through subcommittee, we can see the progress to goal on some of that information. So I just want to thank you, Mr. Nofer, for providing this information. I think it provides us with a pretty good update. Now, in regards to IT, does the citywide risk assessment model have any influence on that? And looking at some of those controls.
So what we do when you say, is there a particular goal you're looking at?
Yeah, goal number 3, I believe it was, if I'm not mistaken.
3. Right. So what we do is every year when we develop our annual audit plan, we use a risk assessment model to develop our audit agenda for the upcoming year. Okay. So every department and look at the size of their budget, look at the controls that they have in place, and we also factor in public image as a risk factor. So we use this model to compile all the risk, and it spits out a score for us. And based upon where they fall in the risk assessment spectrum, whether it's high, moderate, or low, we'll focus our audits on those areas or departments that have been labeled high risk.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. The last question I have is just how many staff do you have dedicated to the hotline? I think that's a 20% figure.
Yeah, so it's Cecilia Goulet her responsibility is to monitor the hotline, and so it's, I think every year we probably get about like 20 tips through our fraud hotline. We also get tips from city management as well as vendors. That we include, those tips in our fraud data.
All right.
Over in a minute.
All right, appreciate that, Mr. Chair. And if we could just have a copy of this, I think that would be helpful if it wasn't provided in a previous email.
It might not have been provided to the entire council, but I will definitely make sure that we forward it along to you, Mr. President. Are there any other questions from the council? Seeing none, Mr. No, the only question I had was when does this start? Fiscal year 2022. Does it start this July?
July 1, yes.
July 1. Okay. All right. And then I'll say my next question for the next. I'll say my next question for the next piece. So okay. I think we're all set, Mr. No. You can move on.
Okay, great. So I'll move on to our activities. So what I like to do at least twice a year is to provide an update on our activities. This is a status report on our activities from July 1 through December 31st, 2020. Now, some of these items you'll be familiar with because the reports, if they've been issued, have been presented to the Audit Committee. So, the way I laid out my report consists of 3 areas. One being carryover assignments from the previous year, ongoing activities, and new activities. So starting out with carryover assignment from previous years, we did a review of the city trusts. We looked at the William Walker, Edward Walker, Barney, Moses, James Garvey, and I guess the James Garvey trusts over at the library. We that report in December 29th to the Audit Committee. No real issues with that review. We're in the process, or actually we've completed the BOT or the bankable overtime review at the Springfield Police Department. So this was a special request by the CAFO. And we expect to present this report along with the Quinn review report next month, early March. So we'll present these 2 reports to the Audit Committee. Next, as I mentioned, we're in the process of completing the Quinn bill or the Quinn review. The report is in draft format and it should be finalized shortly. And we expect to present this report along with the BOT report in early March. We still have open the investigation of the alleged contract violations over at the city's golf courses. We haven't heard anything relating to the federal investigation pertaining to this issue. So we do have a report that we did provide to law enforcement authorities, but as far as we know, that investigation is still open. So as long as that investigation is open, we're going to hold off on presenting that report. So once everything gets adjudicated, our process is to present our investigative reports to the Audit Committee and to the public. But we won't do so until it's fully adjudicated. This is because our reports are used as evidence in a lot of the cases. All right, moving on to page 4, ongoing assignments. We're required by city ordinance to look at the city's investment policy and investment holdings, just to ensure they're in compliance with city ordinance and Mass General laws. We have no issues with the city's investment policy. We maintain the city's fraud hotline. We have a fraud hotline. We also get tips, as I mentioned, from city management and other individuals. So for this 6-month period ended December 31st, 2020, we received 18 allegations, 16 of which have been closed without further action. We did receive a complaint against city clerk about a customer not receiving a refund. We looked into it and determined that this was a clerical oversight. The city clerk did eventually give the refund back to the affected customer. And we did look into an allegation of ethics violation against the director of DPW, which report was just presented tonight. Moving on to page 5, ongoing assignments continued. We're responsible for ensuring that the annual external audit of the city's financial statements is completed. That audit has been completed, so we expect our external auditors to present the results of their audit in the spring of 2021. Next item, we review the school department's student activities fund. And we expect to start this review sometime in the winter. New assignments. We did a follow-up audit or a follow-up review on the city's procurement process, as well as life insurance benefit. And that report was presented in December of 2020. We reviewed the bulk trash sticker program at Big Y, and that review was presented in December of 2020. We are in the process of completing a review of the city's flexible spending account. That review is focused in our scope in that we are just determining the accuracy of the cash balance held by WageWorks for our OMB department. We are also in the process of reviewing health insurance program. We expect that to be done sometime late spring of this year. Next item, we are reviewing the gift card program at Springfield Public Schools. We did have an incident of fraud that we looked into last year. And it had to do with the city gift card program. That report will be presented to the school committee because they are the governing body for that department. Moving on to page 7, we're scheduled to do a payroll audit, and that will start sometime late spring. We have our external auditors conducting a review of the inventory management process at DPW in the Parks Department, and they expect to complete their review sometime in the winter of 2021. And lastly, we are slated to do a cybersecurity review at Springfield Public Schools, which we think is quite timely in light of the recent hack or ransomware at Springfield Public Schools, I think, this past fall. And that review will start sometime in the spring of 2021. Any questions?
Thank you. Councilor Allen, I see your hand just raised in the queue.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. So Mr. No, sometimes I get confused on these. It's very organized report, but I can't always tell. Like, I think you just said there will be some reports in the spring of 21, which is coming up, like cybersecurity review and a couple other things. When something is complete, does it just land on this report? Or do you put out something that says the following projects have been reviewed and completed for fiscal year 21 or something?
So whatever we worked on is presented on this report, whether
on this report that we're looking at.
Yeah, or complete. This is basically everything that we've worked on for the past 6 months. Now, when the reports are complete and ready to be issued, I will issue them separately and present them to the audit committee, and also post them to our website for available for public consumption.
So, I just feel like sometimes our meetings aren't that connected. And I'm trying to figure out a way if it's just me or if there's a better way to connect it. Can you go back to like your goals?
Yep.
In somewhere in there. So this complete 80%, I get that. Yeah, go ahead. Maintain the city's fraud hotline, et cetera. Yep. So those are your goals that you set for specific goals for the year.
Yes.
And then when you complete one of them, it says coordinate audits with the city's external auditors. And the initiative is to coordinate and monitor, blah, blah, blah. And when that's done, does it end up on that report only? It says complete?
It ends up on that status report. So the purpose of that status report is to tell the audit committee what we've been working on past
No, I get
6
that.
months.
No,
Right? So you get that, right? So, but sometimes, normally when a report is complete and ready to be issued, I will present that report to the audit committee. So, it could be on this status report, but the details of that report will be presented in a separate meeting to the audit committee.
Okay, so now we're getting towards what I mean. So when would our next meeting be, roughly? What would be on there?
So our next meeting will be in March, early March, to discuss the police department programs relating to bankable overtime and the Quinn bill.
Okay, so early March is next week. Are you really on an early March?
Oh, well, I'm sorry. First 2 weeks. I'm hoping by March 14th, mid-March then.
All right, that's fine. I'm not trying to squeeze you. I'm just trying to understand. So, so in a couple weeks, we would meet with you again and discuss those reports.
Yes.
And you will tell us not just that you completed them, but you'll say, here's the findings. We found 2 or 3 things that need to be changed. Here's what we did.
Yeah, so those, whenever I present reports, standalone reports, we go over the findings and recommendations, and also invite management to entertain any questions from the counselors.
So before you report to us in a couple weeks or whatever it is, the middle of March sometime, does it go up to the mayor and to TJ, et cetera, before it comes to us?
Yes, because I get their responses, because they're part of management, and I elicit responses from them as it relates to our recommendations, whether they agree, disagree, and what steps they're going to implement to correct the findings that we noted in our report.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's my questions for now.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilor Allen. Are there any other questions from the council? Seeing none, Mr. No, just a couple questions on this. Powers and Sullivan, LLC. How much do we pay Powers and Sullivan? Do you know? And what is their contract for?
So Powers and Sullivan, $170,000 annually, $12,000 of which is paid by Springfield Public Schools because they pay for a separate report. So $158,000 is borne by the city. Now that's down $2,000 from I think 3 years ago when they used to charge us $190,000. So we were able to negotiate a better price when we renewed the contract 3 years ago. So their audit entails auditing the city's financial statements. So they go and verify that the financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects in accordance with.
You got to move away. Oops, I'm sorry.
Okay.
My son here.
In accordance with generally accepted government accounting standards. And the city is required to have audited financial statements by Mass General federal regulations.
Thank Thank you, Mr. No. I had a follow-up question. I see Councilor Allen's hand is up. I'll ask my follow-up question, then I'll get to Councilor Allen. Why are we using Powers and Sullivan?
We went out to bid 3 years ago, and they provided the best price, and they were the most qualified.
Okay, I just want to let the committee know that they are from Wakefield, Mass. And so I have to believe that that we ought to be able to find somebody in the city of Springfield that can offer these same services, which is a topic we'll get to in just a moment. Councilor Allen.
Yeah, thanks, Councilor Hurst. Mr. No, I teach college classes, and I teach about the oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank on the piece of legislation. After Enron and all that stuff happened, there were pieces of legislation that came out in Congress, one of which had a requirement or a recommendation. I don't know if it's a requirement or a recommendation that we not hire, not we, the city of Springfield, but that people generally not hire an auditor for more than 5 years in a row, because there's a possibility that there could be a cozy relationship between the auditor and the financial people. And the way to avoid that is to, go out to bid for a new auditor, and so that there doesn't become relationships that affect the efficacy of the report. Are you familiar with that? God, I'm drawing a blank of the thing.
It's called Sarbanes-Oxley. It was
Sarbanes-Oxley, right?
Yeah, it's a federal regulation that pertains to publicly traded companies, companies that have that sell shares on the stock exchange and have filing requirements with the Securities and Exchange Commission. That regulation does not apply to I guess government organizations or municipal organizations like the city of Springfield, or private organizations. They are recommended as best practices. So we did look into implementing some of the I guess recommended best practices by Enron. And the way that we were able to get comfortable with Powers and Sullivan is that they have a concurring partner, a partner at that firm that reviews work papers and looks at issues. So that concurring partner switches, I think, every couple of years to get a new fresh eyes on the city's audit. So, and I think a lot of firms do that, have different people involved in the audit to get, I guess, a new set of eyes involved.
Well, I think that's good that you looked into it, and it's great that you bailed me out on what the name of the legislation was, because it's coming up in the next chapter. But how long have I still have questions, because it's nothing against any of the work. I've never heard anybody complain about their work, but how long have we had them as auditor?
I'd say close to 10 years.
Yeah. So because of that, and because of Sarbanes-Oxley, I would request that you just take a look at that. I don't know if that, I don't have the authority, nor do I necessarily believe that we need to switch, but I think we need to look at switching. Councilor Hurst just mentioned there's probably somebody closer, and that may be the case as well. But if in the private world, which is a privately owned companies or publicly traded companies, if it's a good idea there to not have somebody for more than 5 years, then why wouldn't it still be a good idea for us? And I know we'd be self-regulating, but I would just request that you look at that and just report back to us on how long it's been and what the possibilities might be for putting out an RFP again or something.
Yes, definitely. I do have to say that Powers and Sullivan, they have a specialty in auditing municipalities. You don't have too many firms that have this expertise. I would say there are probably 4 or 5 in the state. In terms of, firms based out of Springfield that could do this type of work, I don't think there are any, especially.
Yeah, well, so that's what you could look at, and you could tell us that. But I think from an ethics point of view, it makes good sense for us to at least look at that, acknowledge that it's a rule in the private world, and that we should, we're not that exempt from things in the private world, and I think it would be good to look at it, and then we could talk about it.
Sure.
Thank you, Councilor Allen. We have 12 minutes remaining and one more item to go. And I know some of us have a 5 o'clock meeting. So Councilor Whitfield, and then we'll move on to the last item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. No, when I became the chair of the audit committee, I recall that you did go back out to bid, and Powers and Sullivan, I think, was the only one that replied, but we still got like a sizable discount when they reapplied. Do you remember?
If I can correct you, we had, I believe, 3 firms.
3, okay.
That did apply. And Powers and Sullivan offered the best price.
Offered the best price, but it was lower than the contract that they had previously had. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Because I do remember that. And I know that you do go out to bid every 3 years for the contract. And I just wanted to make sure that my understanding was correct. And I remember discussing that there wasn't a lot of firms in the area with the skill set to review or audit municipal governments as well. So I just wanted to make sure that folks know that you are doing due diligence going out to bid for new contracts. It's just the people that reply happen not to be from the area, or for the service they provide and the price, they're just not the best firms.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Whitfield. And we will now move to the last item. Many of you have received my letter to Mr. No asking for an audit. I will give a brief overview as to why I feel it is important. There were 2 reasons that caused me to arrive at this decision. One, we just had a recent special permit that was granted to Mr. Pulsifer. And one of the major concerns that I had there was the subcontracts in terms of who was receiving those contracts and what was the makeup of those individuals and whether they were from Springfield. So that was the first reason that caused me to feel as though we needed to take a more introspective look in terms of how we did things as a city. It didn't make sense for us to be scrutinizing a private contractor and then we're not, and then our own house is not in order. So that was the first reason. And then the second reason was I took a look at a Boston Globe article, and it was probably about a month ago, in which they were asking for Mayor Walsh to increase his numbers of contracts going to people of color, and more specifically, Black-owned businesses and Latino-owned businesses. And Mayor Walsh had previously issued 2 executive orders setting some goals that he was looking to accomplish or achieve with respect to this. And after 2 executive orders, he still had not reached those goals. And the most recent article that I read said that 3 organizations were suing Mayor Walsh as a result, and they were suing the city of Boston as a result. And as a last-ditch effort, Mayor Walsh attempted to set the goal or do a 3rd executive order setting the goal for the hiring of white women at 11%. And the goal for hiring Blacks and Latinos at 6%. And that clearly was not enough for the individuals who were filing the lawsuit. And they felt like this hiring or this practice of issuing contracts had a disparate impact on Blacks and Latinos. And so that made me think about where we are at as a city, and do we have an accurate picture as to where we stand in terms of how those contracts are being dispersed. Are they being dispersed within the city? And then who those contracts are going to, whether they're going to women, whether they're going to veterans, whether they're going to Latin-owned businesses and Black-owned businesses. And then just to couple that with the times, I thought it was even more important because all of the research that I had been reading showed that women-owned businesses were suffering as a result of the pandemic much more than those businesses that were owned by males. And then similarly, Black and Latino-owned businesses were suffering even more so than women-owned businesses. And so the question or what dawned on me is that if we have an opportunity as a city to provide a lifeline to these individual businesses who are shuttering and closing their doors in some instances at a disproportionately higher rate than others, then we should do so. On top of the fact that we should just find ways to invest in those that do business here in the city of Springfield to the extent we can. So following my request, I did receive or look at the response in the news from the mayor, who said he was proud to say that his administration is the most diverse and reflective of our city's population in its history. And then he also went on to say, same goes for our city contracts. And so that caused me to take a step back because, you know, as the mayor of Springfield, maybe, we ought to give the mayor the benefit of the doubt to really show exactly how diverse those contracts are before we start talking about the scope of any audit. And so today, although I disagree to a certain degree with respect to, the whole diversity issue, it seems to me that we should really be pushing towards a more equitable system. Achieving diversity is simply being invited to the party. And oftentimes with these contracts, we all are invited to the party. What oftentimes doesn't happen is we're not asked to dance. And so what I'm hoping is that what we reveal will cause folks to be asked to dance. And then I'm also hopeful that even more than just being asked to dance, what we'll ultimately get to is being allowed to invite other folks to the party and possibly, choose the music selection as well. So understanding all of that, I thought it was best to maybe take a step back and, maybe just ask some significant questions, Mr. No, that could potentially be answered possibly for the March meeting. And so the 4 questions, and I'll certainly send these to you because I know going through a 5-year period might be onerous. We might not have the time. And so let's see if the mayor is indeed accurate. And so what I would like to ask you, and certainly I'll allow others to weigh in, is just for the purposes of the next couple of weeks, because this data should be readily available, is how many contracts for purchases, supplies, and services does the city of Springfield enter into in a non-COVID year, and what the total dollar amount is for those contracts. Seems to me like that should be a quick click of the button for a TJ or, for the director of procurement. The second question that I have, and there are only 4 questions here, is what is the number, percentage, and dollar amount of total contracts awarded to minority-owned business enterprises and women-owned business enterprises, again, in a non-COVID year? And we can ask the administration, I know I said 5 years, but let's allow them to choose their best year, whichever that is, over the course of 5 years. And then the third is, what is the median number of total contracts awarded? And then finally, I'd like to know what percentage of the contracts awarded to minority-owned business enterprises and women-owned business enterprises is above the median, and what percentage of contracts are below the median. And I think that will give us an accurate picture without having you, Mr. No, to have to do an inordinate amount of work, especially if we're dealing with a group of contracts that is already diverse. I very well may be wrong. So I'd like to give the mayor an opportunity and the administration to show us exactly how diverse or equitable their issuing of contracts here in the city of Springfield are. And with that said, I don't have anything more to say on that, Mr. No, although I would love for you to let me know whether getting those answers is feasible within the next couple of weeks. And then I think we can talk about whether it makes sense to have an audit, because if it's diverse and if it's equitable, then an audit's not necessary. Councilor No, I'll let you respond, and then Councilor Whitfield, I see your hand is up. You'll be next in line. I know we got a 5 o'clock, so Councilor No, if you could be brief.
Yes, Councilor Hurst, if you could just email me your 4 questions, and I will follow up with TJ Plant in trying to get this information. I do have to say that the city's procurement process is very rigorous and follows mass general laws. And we looked at the city's procurement process and noted that they were fairly good at following the law in terms of 30B and procuring goods and services. Now, could it be better? Maybe. Well, I don't think there's anything in the law that says you can award a contract to someone strictly based on their ethnicity. So I think we could talk.
We can talk about that. We can talk about that at future meetings, yep. Mr. No. I think there's a deeper dive that we have to do. I think just getting that information is a great start, and we ought to know where we're at. I mean, that's just bottom line in order to understand how we can move forward. Councilor Whitfield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to be very brief. I really appreciate the fact that you were requesting an audit, because getting the information from economic development on the storefront grants was like pulling teeth, and I still didn't get an answer on the minority contracts and who gets, I forgot what they say, but some folks got to pay back the loan, some don't. And from what I was hearing out in the community, a lot of the minorities, if they defaulted, would have to pay back, and then others wouldn't. And so I was trying to get that level of detail, which I couldn't. And so if those questions cannot be answered, I would like that storefront grant also looked at and see which people that default have to pay. And I wanted to go back 10 years because they only gave me a 5-year look back. And that was not, I needed some specifics, and it was just a 6-year time frame that I didn't get. And I also wanted to say that diversity isn't enough. It is equity that we need to look for, because I don't think it's equitable that every single time procurement advertises is in the Republican. There are other newspapers, other media outlets that meet different demographics. And so I don't think it's equitable to say, let's always use this one newspaper. And while I do think they're following the law because it does have to be advertised, I think they can offer different methods of advertisement. And I want to make sure that those other methods of advertisement are being used. And so I will also, Mr. Chair, send you some more things that I would like looked at, and you can also send those to Mr. No along with what you have.
Thank you, Councilor Whitfield. And just for the record, there's been an overwhelmingly positive response from the community that I've heard related to this issue. And so it's clearly something that is not sitting well with the community and something that we have to look at. And the fact that you can't find out tomorrow, Mr. No, what you might be able to do, where the city stands, is a problem in and of itself. So I await your answers to the questions. I will forward them over shortly after this meeting. Are there any other last questions from the councilors? I know Councilor Brown left to go to the meeting that we all need to go to, or at least some of us. From from the council?
I'm still here.
Oh, my Mr. Brown, Councilor Brown's still here. Okay. Are there any other questions from the council?
All set.
Seeing none, Mr. No, thank you. Keep up the good work. You're doing an amazing job. It sounds like you've done a tremendous amount of work with respect to, auditing, and we appreciate your efforts sincerely.
Thank you very much.
Take
Thank
it easy,
you.
counselors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.